Hello and welcome back to another Geek First Sidequest bonus episode. It is just me, Dylan, here today, and I'm doing another Marvel Snap focused solo episode here. I did one of these back in February, and I kind of just showed off. Here's all the decks that I've been using, some fun ones, some good ones, some bad ones, all the whole mix there. And then I know I mentioned that episode that I was gonna stop playing the game for a bit, and I did. I didn't play for a couple months, but back in May I started playing a lot again in June, and think the game's in a really good spot right now. So I've come back to share a few more decks that I've been using in the last few months. So I'm very excited to talk about that. Really, no plugs here. Just make sure to join the Discord where whenever there's new Marvel Snap update or drop or whatever it is, info. Usually we're talking about in there, me, S Bubs, and Clay, having some fun discussion. So come join in over there, and hit up Patreon to get episodes early and ad free, such as this episode. You got a nice few days early and all that. But without further ado, let's kind of get into it here. So I think this is a good time to do this because May and June I picked up both the season passes there. I played a lot. Finally, Series 3 complete, which feels good. I had some very crucial cards as my final ones to get. I think Lockjaw was the last Series 3 I got, which is such an important card for so many decks, and obviously used to be a bit more prominent when I guess just before he got patched and changed, so he couldn't switch out multiple cards in one turn. So yeah, I feel like that really opened up a lot of possibilities, and a lot has changed in the game since I did that last episode. The Conquest mode has been in there for a while at this point. They just, at the time of me recording this, just released Spotlight caches this week, so I picked up Jean Grey through one of those, and I've used her a couple times. I don't really have any decks to shout out with her yet. Doesn't seem like the most powerful card, and is still very buggy from what I understand. But we'll get into that. And then I also felt like this is a good time to do this because last month was the highest I've got on the ranking. I got up to level 89, so close. When you hit that threshold of a new 10, then you get bumped up to I would have got to 93 if I just even got a couple more cubes, and who knows, maybe I could have made the run to infinite, but didn't end up happening. I don't know if I'll grind it as much this month to try and get there. Might wait it out, but yeah, I think I have some good meta strong decks, but I don't really ever look up other people's decks or decks online, meta decks, things like that. So it's really just I hear some chatter when I'm browsing Reddit or see us talking in the Discord or something like that. But hopefully I have some good kind of unconventional or slightly different versions to some popular decks and whatnot. So the first one I want to share here, if you're on YouTube, and I have a little video of this on the side so you can see it here. But we're going to go with the Search and Destroy deck, which is a deck that has been very strong for me, and there's even been some changes to cards in here, but essentially here are the cards here. We have Nebula, Nova, Adam Warlock, Armor, Colossus, Green Goblin, Warpath, Atuma, Sentry, Professor X, Orca, and Destroyer. So obviously this is a Search and Destroy. This is a Destroyer deck. It's built around getting that card and using him. And so usually those decks revolve around having one location locked down either with Armor or Professor X to protect all your cards there, and hopefully you have enough power to win that lane. You need to, and then you drop Destroyer in one of the other locations, and hopefully his raw power is enough to win you that location as well. So there's some good contingencies here. I think that usually the way I'll try and play it is drop Nebula in one of the either specifically the left or middle location, whatever one is a bit better. Obviously on turn one, if you get her, you don't necessarily know which location is going to be better for you at that time. Just base it off what that first location shows you. And then if you have Armor, drop Armor there. You could throw Green Goblin into that lane to make that particular location even stronger. And then you have, this is what I like about this deck, you have a couple options. You have backup plans, which is how I've kind of changed it over the time. But you have three very powerful 4-cost cards, 2 4-10s and a 4-9. So either you need one of those, and because of the draws, you'll most likely get one, if not two. So you can kind of pick which one's best for you. If you haven't got Armor yet, or even if you did, sometimes it's fine to just drop Professor X on that lane just to lock it out, close it out, so that your opponent can't do anything to it on the last turn. And yeah, so obviously you want to do the middle or left location so that you're able to play Sentry. You can't play Sentry on the right location because of his Void ability. And so usually what I try to do is make the Yeah, the middle or the left is that lane I'm going to lock down. The right lane I usually make it a bit of the dump lane, but obviously if Destroyer is there, he'll get rid of the Void and any other bad thing that's going on there. So it's fine to play him there as well. And it can be a bit of a surprise for your opponent if they expect that, okay, they're going to win the right location because you have -10 power there. They might not play as many cards there, but if you destroy that, then obviously it's a huge swing. It can be a 25 power swing, right? That's pretty crazy stuff. Now, I'll usually throw Nova there as well. Really nice to buff up the 4 cards that you have locked down in your other location. And, Destroyer, just because of how powerful some cards are these days, especially high evolutionary out there, sometimes Destroyer's 15 power is just not enough to win a location, so Nova can help with that. And then I think when I've seen variations of this deck, other people using them in game, sometimes they'll instead of Colossus, they'll have Winter Soldier, and so obviously those being the cards that Destroyer will hit them, Colossus will be fine, or Winter Soldier, you get a more powerful card. I'd say they're probably about equal. Winter Soldier might be a bit better. It's got a higher peak, of course, but I kind of like the consistency that Colossus brings, plus I just like the card, and there's not too many opportunities to use him elsewhere. And then not much else to explain about this deck. I mean, Green Goblin's great because you put him down, Destroyer won't remove him. You're still getting the effect of him, but it's just on your opponent's side. And then Adam Warlock, if you can get it's tricky, this deck, because you don't really want to put him in that strong lane. You want to save that 4 powerful cards to win that location that you're locking down. So I usually put him in a lane with Nova, and even if he gets me 1 draw, I'm happy. Or in a location, Adam Warlock and then Green Goblin on the opponent's side. Once again, if you get 1 draw with him, I consider that a success. And then with this deck too, the whole thing was built around Destroyer, but if you don't draw Destroyer, even with Warlock, then you're kind of screwed. You don't really have a backup plan. So that's why I've put Orca into this deck. Surprise card. This card's not very good, I feel like. So it's fun to have him somewhere. And it technically is more powerful than Destroyer. So some games I'll just end up playing, like if I didn't have Nova down, for example, I'll just end up playing Orca instead of Destroyer anyway. And typically people, I feel like when they see the first few turns coming out, they might start to expect that Destroyer. So that can also be a nice surprise if you drop Orca out there. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all. I guess if you don't have Nebula, the one recommendation I could recommend to switch out, it would be Ant-Man, because you're probably going to have 4 cards in that lockdown location, and 1/4 is pretty good power, but Nebula is just such a strong 1-cost card. So we spent a lot of time on that one because that is definitely one of my top favorite decks. Move on. Let's talk about some Thanos decks. I think I'm going to go with the Thanos move deck first, and I'm gonna disclaimer, this is not the best deck in the game, but I've had a lot of fun with this, and I have won a good amount, and I've actually had a lot of success in Conquest with it, just because it is such a weird deck with so many different ideas going on that sometimes your opponent, just even if you're playing multiple matches against the same person in Conquest, they might not even understand fully what you got going on here. But the cards here are Iron Fist, Yondu, Carnage, Falcon, Ghost Spider, Doctor Strange, Killmonger, Vulture, Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2099, Thanos, and Death. So it's a bit of a spider deck. But yeah, you've got some Death in there. You've got some move. And then you've got, obviously, the Thanos ability here. So the main thing you want going on here is you want to get Death out on your final turn for sure. And ideally, if you can get a turn that's dropping Thanos and Death, that's a really nice turn 6. So you have a lot of ways to do that. Carnage to eat 3 of the stones. That's really good. That'll get you like not halfway there, but a lot of the way there already. You have Spider-Man 2099. That's kind of the genesis of this deck, is when I picked up 2099, I was trying to think of all the ways that I could use him. And I really liked the idea of the Space Stone. I felt like that's just such a convenient, easy way. It only moves 1 card, but that's all you need for 2099. You can be very precise about where you put it down. It's a very cheap card as well. So I found that is a really nice way to set up where you want to get 2099 moved. And then when you do something like that, obviously Miles becomes a very cheap card. You have some backup movement options in here. So obviously it's not Space Stone's not the only thing that's going to get 2099 moved around. You have Ghost Spider, you have Iron Fist. Yondu's in there just to make Death 1 card cheaper. This is where I have Doctor Strange, who doesn't end up making it into a lot of my move decks. I just don't think he's the strongest card in that way. But I feel like in this deck, it actually works pretty nicely, because 2099 is your most powerful card until you get a Thanos or a Death out there. Or if Carnage ate a bunch of cards, he'll end up taking that position away from you. So you got to watch out for that. And then Killmonger, really important in this deck, and I think I'll have this in another deck too, where Killmonger is really great to play right before 2099, just so that he removes any of those weaker one-cost cards out of the pool that 29.99 could hit. So yeah, with this deck, you're not even necessarily trying to get Thanos powered up with all 6 stones. That's not even really part of it. You're more just using the utility of those one-cost cards and what they give you into building into a death, into removing cards of 2099 and Killmonger, that sort of thing. So obviously Killmonger and the stones as well is a really great way to get death out, because if you just get a bunch of those down, throw Killmonger, that'll just essentially knock death down to a 1 or 2 cost, and then it only takes a couple other kills with a Carnage or 2099 to get her down to a 0 cost. And the other one that I wanted to shout out, I have not used this a whole lot. This is a Thanos ongoing deck. So the cards here are Ant-Man, Luke Cage, Dazzler, Mr. Fantastic, Captain America, Kazar, Iron Man, Blue Marvel, Devil Dinosaur, Spectrum, Onslaught, and Thanos. So obviously a lot of really expensive cards in here. But you have to remember that, of course, you're also going to have 6 one-cost cards put in the pool of cards that you can possibly draw because of this. So the idea here is really nothing too crazy, but if you think about it, Onslaught it kind of interestingly works with a couple of the stones, specifically with the Power Stone, where you can get Thanos just an insane amount. And obviously you would need like a Time Stone play in order to have 2 6-cost cards out in one game, or a location that gives you that. But then Onslaught as well with the what is the orange stone called? Whatever that one's called, which reduces all of your opponent's cards at that location by 1 power. Increasing that to 2 is really nice. That's a really powerful ability. And then obviously Spectrum here is also a good 6-cost card because it will buff 2 of those stones as well as a bunch of other cards you have here. So yeah, I don't think it's really all that complicated, but like also Kazar and Blue Marvel to give your stones a lot more power is really nice. Iron Man, just with once again some of these doubled effects with Onslaught and whatnot. Just a lot of powerful ongoing cards that work nicely along with the stones. And yeah, once again, this is a deck that Thanos, not necessarily even going to play him. It's more that you're using him to get the stones out of there. But he's always a nice backup option, a 6/10, even if he's unbuffed. Still, it's decent. It's lower than the regular curve of 6-cost card, but it's not terrible by any means. Let's see. Let's go with the... Oh, this has been fun. I've been trying out an Agatha deck again recently. And so I want to share this one because it's a very fun one to play. But the cards here are Wave, Jubilee, Super Scroll, Shauna the She-Devil, Crossbones, Devil Dinosaur, Leech, Captain Marvel, Doctor Doom, America Chavez, She-Hulk, and of course Agatha. So this might sound like a very weird deck, and what I like about it is I'm using some like non-traditional cards like Crossbones and Leech. I just never see played, but I find that it actually works well with Agatha, where Agatha puts cards in really stupid spots, but Crossbones, it helps you to really guarantee you winning a specific lane, and sometimes Agatha really struggles to do that, so it can be nice to stack power on a lane that you're already in advantage of. Jubilee is obviously really good here because you have so many powerful 6-cost cards to pull those out. Super Scroll can be really nice. Devil Dinosaur, just because you have so many expensive cards in this deck that you're not really going to play that many cards this game. I don't have anything that costs 1 or 2 because I find that just screws with Agatha. She'll just never play a 5 or 6, or I guess not a 6 cost. She'll never play a 4 or 5 cost card if you have 1 or 2s in your hand. She might sometimes, but just the RNG of it is not good. So I just feel like it's easy to remove all those cards. I've thought too about playing like Quicksilver and Domino, just like guaranteed, okay, she'll play those turns 1 and 2, and then here's your other cards. But I'd prefer to just have a pool of much stronger cards to give you that ability that in the second half of the game you can claim that win. America Chavez is here to make sure that you essentially just draw your other cards first. That's a good way to guarantee that kind of thing. And on turn 6, it doesn't really matter if you haven't got Agatha down at that point, then she's going to play herself anyway, so it doesn't matter. But obviously the core of this deck is that you are ideally getting Wave either in your initial hand or turn 1 or turn 2 draws, or actually, sorry, turn 2 or 3 draws. And that's a good chance there. I don't know, is it 50% chance, 40% chance? I don't know what the math is on it, but it must be pretty good. And then obviously Wave turn 3 into turn 4, Agatha, she'll play herself all the time, and then you have some really good 5 and 6 cost cards to hopefully guarantee you a win, even if you essentially skipped the first 2 turns. And then the wave works nicely where you can kind of slow your opponent down a bit too on that turn 4. So strangely, this can definitely work. Other, I guess, notes about this deck: Doctor Doom and Shauna are really good just to make sure you're putting power on each lane. Sometimes Agatha plays cards in a really dumb way, and you just are leaving certain locations completely empty. You're stacking all your cards in one spot. But this is a good way to get some cards on your side of the table. Captain Marvel is really good as well because, let's say you didn't get wave, and so you're playing turn 4, 5, 6. Let's say you're throwing down maybe Shauna into Captain Marvel into Agatha. Just because of how bad her placement's going to be, Captain Marvel can kind of fix that problem sometimes, which can be kind of nice. So she'll get you the win. And then also sometimes Agatha just plays really inefficiently, so I like She-Hulk in here because, once again, it could also be a situation where on turn 3, if you still haven't drawn wave at this point, it could reduce the cost down to 3, and on your next turn you could play She-Hulk nice and early if Agatha chooses to do so. And then Leech is almost a bit more of a meme, but sometimes that's like all you need. If you never drew the wave in the match, if you can just remove whatever combo your opponent has on the final turn, that Agatha coming in with 14 power can sometimes clinch you the win. So maybe not the strongest deck, but as far as Agatha deck goes, it's actually one that can win you games. So that can be fun to use. So maybe let's talk about some move decks here. I talked about that Thanos move deck, obviously. But move decks have got a bunch of new cards in the last month, specifically with Spider-Gwen and 2099, both of which I have and have been using. So I'm going to go with move options is what I call this deck. And so I think, one of the things that I really struggled with move decks for a long time, well, one, Human Torch was also one of the just final Series 3 cards I got. So I felt like move decks weren't really worth using until I had him. It's just such a powerful 1-cost card to have in the deck. So even just getting him back-to-back with Ghost Spider, back-to-back with 2099 was a really nice 3-card swing and made move decks a lot more viable and just a lot more fun. I just have more options, hence the name of this deck. But yeah, so what I was saying is with move decks, sometimes you just kind of pigeonholed, you're kind of boxed in because of Heimdall's like the go-to 6-cost card, and it makes it so you're kind of predictable on what you're going to do. It makes it so you're probably going to be pretty weak on the right location, and your opponent can know that and just say like, oh, I'm not even going to bother fighting on the left location. I'm just going to fight for the middle and right. And then there's not much you can do about that. And that's your most powerful card that's going to cinch you the win at the end of the day. So this is meant to give you options, obviously. So here are the cards: Human Torch, Iron Fist, Kraven, Ghost Spider, Multiple Man, Cloak, Vulture, Hulkbuster, Polaris, Spider-Man 2099, Heimdall, and Magneto. So that's the clear distinction here with this deck, is having Heimdall and Magneto together in here. So if you draw both of them and you're coming down on turn 6, it's really nice to be like, okay, which one of these two is going to do it for me? Which one is going to be better? They're going to expect Heimdall as well, of course, so they're not going to really see the Magneto come in. He has more power than Heimdall, so sometimes even just that 12 power can get you the victory. But, dropping Magneto into a lane with Kraven and pulling over 2 or 3 cards and just giving Kraven an additional 2 to 4 to 6 power, really, really nice and also very fun kind of strategy there. And then, other than that, I don't know if there's really much I need to explain here. This is a pretty standard move deck. You have Hulkbuster to put on either Human Torch or Multiple Man, which is a very popular thing to do, especially right now with Phoenix Force, which is, I didn't pick up this season pass, so I don't have that card to use in a deck like this. And then Polaris might seem like a bit of a weird addition. Obviously, it works well with Kraven, but otherwise, without someone like a Kingpin or something like that, it might seem like, okay, well, what is really the point? But to me, Polaris is just such a strong card to kind of slightly screw over your opponent, to have and also just has 5 power for a 3-cost, just a really, really solid card. So I really like her and try to put her into every move deck that I have, even if it's more about moving my cards than the opponent's cards. Okay, next up, I want to share this deck, which is I'm going to say my most powerful deck and the one I've had the most success with, and this was the deck that got me up to level 89 on the ladder in the last month here. And I've seen more people using it since, or actually variations of it, but I do feel like I I kind of came up with it myself, a bit of a hipster pick here. And obviously there was a recent buff to a notable card in this deck. But here's this deck is called the Scry of Sauron. A little Lord of the Rings pun there. But the cards here are Zero, Ebony Maw, Zabu, Lizard, Sauron, Venom, Shuri, Shang-Chi, Enchantress, Typhoid Mary, Taskmaster, and Red Skull. So obviously the kind of synergy here is Shuri into Red Skull into Taskmaster. That's a really great turn. 4, 5, 6. Shuri will make Red Skull into a 5/28, and then Taskmaster can copy that 28 power without any of the negative ongoing effect. And then obviously you have, so the idea here is Sauron is here. He will remove the abilities of Lizard, Typhoid Mary, and Red Skull. So all these debuffs to power or buffs for your opponent are just removed completely. And also, it's kind of interesting the way Sauron works is he doesn't remove ongoing abilities. He removes all of the text on cards that are ongoing. So the distinction there, you might think like, okay, well, what about someone like Electro? That could be an interesting card because then if you have the on reveal effect without the negative ongoing, that's a really powerful card. But it doesn't actually work that way because he actually removes all of the text on the card, so you don't get the on reveal. So Electro ends up being a useless card in this deck. But what this does is it means that Ebony Maw, he has two separate kind of abilities, right? You can't play this card past turn 3, and then the ongoing is you can't play cards at this location. But once again, since he removes all the text, that means you can play Ebony Maw up to turn 6, and obviously you can play cards after him. So essentially the ideal way that this deck will be played if you get the perfect draws is turn 1, 0, turn 2, Lizard, so you've removed that ability, you put him down, turn 3, Sauron, turn 4, Shuri, turn 5, Red Skull, turn 6, Taskmaster to copy Red Skull, and then Ebony Maw somewhere. And I put down, 35 power on turn 6 across 2 separate lanes is really, really strong. It's really, really good. And then, so I have some backup plans in this deck. So Venom obviously is a good way too. He can eat Typhoid Mary or Red Skull or Lizard, whatever. So you can get those strong power numbers without the negative downside. You also have Enchantress who can hit your opponent's card. So it works as a counterattack card, but it can also remove Typhoid Mary or Red Skull's abilities. And then, you only have one actually good ongoing in this deck, and that is Zabu. But the thing is, you're very rarely, if ever, and you're probably not going to win the game if you're playing Zabu after Sauron, right? Zabu works as a nice turn 2 alternative if you don't have a Lizard. And that's why I like this deck too, is if you, let's say, you're obviously aiming for that main power combo in these matches. But if you don't get it, Zabu gives you a really powerful turn 6, even if you didn't have Red Skull or Taskmaster draw or something like that, because it gives you the ability to do a Shang-Chi and, let's say, a Typhoid Mary in the same turn. And on turn 6, that can be really powerful. Or you could do Shuri into Typhoid Mary on turn 6. Or you could just do a full counterattack with Shang-Chi and Enchantress in turn 6. So you have a lot of options in that way. And then what else is there to mention about this deck? I don't think there's really much. Obviously this one can be countered pretty hard by a Shang-Chi if you hit one of your cards. That can be pretty brutal. But yeah, I've just found a ton of success with it. And you definitely have to retreat at the right times if you're not getting the right card draws. But, I guess maybe my last point here is with Shuri, obviously Red Skull is the cream of the crop. You want to get that 28 power. That's really good. But you have other cards with really high power where if you use Typhoid after Shuri, that's 420. That's still really good power. Even if Ebony Maw, which sounds like a weird kind of unintuitive turn 5, but if you do Shuri into Ebony Maw for 114, that's pretty crazy. And then if Taskmaster copies that, a 514, like that's still really solid and can oftentimes win you the game. So this deck obviously has an ideal strategy, but it's got backup plans built into it, which is why I think I was able to climb so much on the ladder with it there. Next up, I will share this Patriot deck. So this is I call this the Patriot V4. And actually back in that cast I did back in February, whatever it was, I had a Patriot deck there. And this is called V4 because I've just changed it so many times. I really wanted to get like Dazzler and Patriot working together. I thought that could be like an interesting synergy, but I could never really make it work. I tried so many different cards, and obviously there's a lot of cards in the game that don't have abilities, so you could think, okay, like Thing could work in here, or Abomination. I think I had those in that February deck that I mentioned. But ultimately, this is the one I've landed on as being potentially the strongest. I still think there's room for improvement, but I also like that there's kind of a backup strategy built into this and kind of a fun, different variation on it that I don't see anyone else use, and that's for me very satisfying. So the cards here are Wasp, Misty Knight, Mr. Sinister, Okoye, Mysterio, Mystique, Patriot, Brood, Nakia, Doctor Doom, Onslaught, and Ultron. So I'll explain the Okoye and Nakia element being in here because that's just something you're not going to really see in a deck like this. And Nakia actually just, once again, this week got changed, which it's hard for me to tell if that is actually a buff or a nerf for this deck. I think it ultimately makes her more consistent, but maybe the peaks are a bit lower. But essentially, the reason that those two cards are in here is that if you can, let's say turn 2 Okoye, turn 3 Nakia, now buffing every card in your hand, if you're powering up a Mr. Sinister or a Brood, those are like exponential improvements, right? If Okoye hits Mr. Sinister, he now turns from a 2/2 that essentially is a 2/4 into a 2/6, and if Nakia hits him as well, that becomes a 2/8. So that's where before it was really nice when Nakia hit Mr. Sinister and like turned him into a 2/8. That was really, really nice. And then of course half of that, Mr. Sinister, not him, but the clone, will also get buffed by Patriot. So it can just become insane. And then a very similar idea where Brood, whatever his power is given to his Broodlings. And so if you can buff him with Okoye or Nakia, then that's really great. That can give you insane amounts of power in the one lane where he might be the only card you play in that certain location, right? It's just Brood, and then the other cards are elsewhere. And then everything else here, pretty straightforward. So Patriot, if you can play Patriot into Mystique, or if not, Patriot and then turn 6, drop Onslaught on there to buff all of those cards that don't have abilities, in which you have plenty of them. Doctor Doom also got nerfed in the last month here, but he's still powerful. It's nice to have 2 4-cost, no ability cards that can get boosted. Mysterio is obviously really strong for the illusions. Misty Knight and Wasp, I really like. Wasp is a great clinch moment. Also, if you can Okoye, Nakia is boosting Wasp and making that 0/1 into a 0/2, 0/3. That can be really nice, plus the boost at the end. And then Ultron, I feel like last case scenario is Ultron. If you're not getting enough cards down, he can help just fill up your board. So that's what is also nice about this deck. On turn 6, you have Doom, Onslaught, or Ultron. You'll probably draw one of those, so you have some sort of option on the final turn there. So try this version out with Okoye and Nakia. It's a fun variant on this pretty standard like Patriot deck. And then let's see. I'm going to go with this deck next, which is called Overflow. And this was, I'm going to say, the second best deck of the month for me. This one and the Scry of Sauron deck were the two that I was really using in tandem, switching off between them, and I was really climbing a lot with it here. So the cards here, I don't know if I mentioned the name. I call it the Overflow deck. So you got Iceman, Korg, Black Widow, Master Mold, Baron Mordo, Mystique, Wave, Maximus, Darkhawk, Rockslide, Ronin, and Odin as the final card there. So obviously Darkhawk and Ronin are kind of the core of this deck. Ronin being giving you more power based on how many cards are in your opponent's hand, and then Darkhawk being how many cards are in your opponent's deck. So there's almost a bit of an unintuitive connection between those two cards, or even in this deck. If you have something like a Maximus or a Baron Mordo who are drawing cards out of your opponent's deck to fill up their hand to buff Ronin, that's kind of in a way nerfing Darkhawk's potential power. But really, in an ideal world, you're not playing both Darkhawk and Ronin in one match. You're just having the option to be able to go either way, and based on the draws in your initial hand, based on what your opponent's playing, based on what the locations are, one of these might be better. And I've definitely had plenty of games where I'm playing both of them, and it's fairly successful as well. And then obviously Mystique is in there, who can double one of those effects so that you can spread it across multiple locations, which is really nice. Mystique's a bit stronger with Darkhawk. You'll just get a bit higher of a peak there, but copying Ronin is perfectly good as well. So yeah, I think Master Mold, if you don't have him, I would not use this deck. I don't think you can swap him out for anyone else and get nearly the same returns, and I spent my tokens on Master Mold because I really wanted him, because I just had the vision for this deck and I really wanted to try it out, and I'm really glad I did because it's given me so much success. But yeah, I'm at Master Mold puts 2 Sentinels in your opponent's hand, which means that there is going to be 2 Sentinels in their hand for the rest of the game, because if they play them, they'll just get more into their hands. That works really, really, really well with Ronin, and even with Darkhawk too, because the name of this deck, Overflow, you're trying to get 7 cards in your opponent's hand, not just above Ronin, because then they're just not drawing anymore, and ideally their hand is stuffed with garbage. You have Korg and Rock Slide, just throwing rocks in their deck. And so many times that this deck, it's not even that I was able to have a strong turn 5-6 play with Ronin, who has a ton of power. It's that my opponent's like turn 4-5-6 just ends up being useless. They're playing like 1 Sentinel or like a Sentinel and a random 1 cost card, because you've just screwed with their hand so much and they haven't been able to draw the cards they want. You turned some crucial card in their deck from as Baron Mordo like into a 6 cost card, so they can't really play that. Iceman to just screw over some combo in their hand. You have so many ways to mess with them. Black Widow is really nice in here as well, but I will say this deck works without her, just because this was, I think, the second to last Series 3 card that I end up getting. I was trying so hard to get her because I was using this deck a bunch. I'm like, man, this deck would be even better with Widow in there. And I finally did get her, and she does add to it as well, but it works without her as well. She's really nice because, it's putting a card in your opponent's hand, but it's not drawing, so it works well for Darkhawk and Ronin. It's just a nice 2-for there. And then, so obviously Wave in here makes sense. It reduces the amount of cards your opponent can play. So if you're stuffing their hand with stuff, and then the next turn they can only play 1 card, you're just building up Ronin, who's then in turn building up Darkhawk in a way. But here's a couple combos. So ideally, what works really nicely is if you can pick a location, throw Korg there, throw Master Mold, maybe Rock Slide, or maybe even Widow, something like that. You can throw down a bunch of cards, and then turn 6, if you can Odin in the empty spot there to fill up their hand again, to fill up more, I guess throw more cards in their deck. You can really power up your Ronin or Darkhawk, who you ideally played in the turn before that. But I also just had a nasty combo of playing Korg, playing Master Mold, and then playing Wave turn 3 on that location, and then Odin on top of that to make Wave proc again. So your opponent's playing only 1 card 2 turns in a row, which is totally fine for you. And then you've filled up their hand with now Master Mold has gotten 2 hits, so that's 4 Sentinels in your opponent's hand, assuming they even have space at this point, as well as more rocks, or even Iceman is fine in that situation, just get multiple hits with the ice ability. That is just a nasty combo, and it is so satisfying. And I've landed it so many times because it doesn't have to be that exact combo. It's just Wave and Odin is the combo there, and you can fill in whatever cards you want. Black Widow, Mordo, Master Mold. If you can hit your opponent twice with a Widow in 1 game early on, like that is so strong. And then, Maximus is in here too. He kind of unintuitively works with Darkhawk, as I mentioned. He's more of a turn 6 play if you had Ronin on turn 5. You can play Ronin or Maximus and Mold or Widow on turn 6 or something like that, just to fill up your opponent's hand again. Even if you don't get that Wave Odin combo, Odin just on turn 6 to make sure that your opponent has 7 cards at the very end of the game is obviously really strong, because on turn 6 they're obviously going to play at least 1 card no matter what you did to them previously. And so to just top them off again to give Ronin all that power is really, really nice. Wave also makes it so you could play an early Ronin. It's not an early Darkhawk, but even if you're playing him on turn 4 with the Wave ability, that still is not too bad at all. So a lot of options here, really fun, really annoying for your opponent, but it just works so well, and I'm glad that it does. It's very fun. I think I just have a couple more to show off here. Let's go with, Thunder Surfer. So I've seen a couple variants of this deck, and I've played against a few of these, and I just found when I'm playing against them, they're so strong, and that's why I wanted to build my own version of it. And I have some weird additions in here that could maybe be a bit better, but I'll share what I got here anyway. So we have Wasp, Yellow Jacket, Psylocke, Brood, Lockjaw, Silver Surfer, Gambit, Juggernaut, Kingpin, Thor, Wong, and Sarah. So the general idea here is it's a Silver Surfer deck. You're powering up your 3-cost cards, in which you have 7 of them in here, so you're going to be able to get a lot of them down. Brood as well will duplicate or triplicate, whatever that would be, duplicating twice. So that can hit him a bunch of times. And especially if you have Wong down, Silver Surfer could could proc multiple times. So obviously that's pretty intuitive. Sarah here works really well in that way as well, because I mean 3-cost cards are kind of weird. Think about like a 1-cost or a 2-cost. If you're trying to have a deck that has a lot of those, you have a lot of opportunities to play them. But 3-costs are weird where, obviously on turn 3 you could play one 3-cost card, but turn 4 you can still only play one. Turn 5 you can still only play one. So you can never really get too many of them down. And that's where Sarah on turn 5 into playing 3-cost cards as your final turn is really, really nice. If you play something like Kingpin into Juggernaut to Juggernaut all of your opponent's cards into Kingpin, and then Surfer to boost up your cards at the end is really nice. Obviously, there's a lot of synergy between Thor and Wong in this deck. Thor, you get the Mjolnir, drop him on Wong, get him buffed up a bunch of times. Lockjaw just helps you get some of these powerful cards out. Sometimes Lockjaw will screw you over a little bit just because of the order of events. And then something like Wong into Gambit, once again, it works really well for a nice turn 6 of if you had Sarah down and you can play a bunch of 3-cost cards. If you can play Wong along with Kingpin Juggernaut, that's a lot of destruction you're going to be doing. Or even just, Gambit into Thor, into Silver Surfer is fine. And then obviously, so with Lockjaw here, you have 2 0-cost cards to just play on Lockjaw. So essentially, you're just trying to do that to draw out some of your more powerful cards. You probably don't need Yellow Jacket in here, and you can even see, obviously, Wasp, Yellow Jacket, and Thor. That's just asking for a Jane Foster. I had a version of this deck that had Foster in there to pull out those 0-cost cards. But ultimately, it doesn't really go with the rest of the synergy of the deck. So yeah, Yellow Jacket, you probably don't need him here, but he's just a card that I have nowhere else, and I really like to have. In an ideal world, I will have one of every card in some deck that I have at some point. So this is where it makes sense for Yellow Jacket. And then Psylocke here is really just to give you a potentially early Wong play. If you can do Psylocke turn 2, Wong turn 3, and then get some increased returns from playing those 3-cost cards with those on reveal effects multiple times. That's really nice. And then I think the last deck I will share here is the Gambit deck. And this week just received a nerf. Gambit received, I'm not even going to say a nerf. It is definitely a nerf, but it honestly just feels more of a fix. It just felt really broken that Gambit could destroy enemy cards without having to discard. Obviously he will, but if you have no cards in your hand, it would have worked. But now they changed that. So they gave him a bit more power, which is actually nice because he is a bit weaker now. But I've used this deck since the nerf, and it actually still works fine, and I'll explain why that is. So the cards here are Ghost, Yondu, Invisible Woman, Swarm, Ironheart, Mystique, Gambit, Killmonger, Wong, Shang-Chi, Odin, and Death. So obviously, the core strategy, the core combo here is playing something like Wong, Mystique, and then playing Gambit after that to destroy your opponent's entire play field, and then potentially even dropping Odin on turn 6 to make that happen again. And so even if you had, let's say, just Wong, Gambit, and then Odin, you didn't even get Mystique, you would still get destroying so many of your opponent's cards. So obviously that got nerfed slightly, but that's why I think with this deck, like if you see that the cards you're drawing early on are going to work for you, sometimes I'll just leave cards in my hand to give me some ammunition. So Invisible Woman, I might even just not play anything on turn 2. I'll just, even if I have her, I'll just leave her in my hand just to give me a little bit more ammo moving on. But obviously if you draw Swarm, it should fix any issue you have, because then Gambit will just continually discard Swarm. He'll keep spawning more swarms, and you'll be good. So that's kind of the contingency plan for this deck still working. And to me, that actually works better. I think that feels much more balanced and nice, because playing against Gambit decks similar to this could be very frustrating. So between that, Yondu's hit and Killmonger, that can really help you get Death. So obviously, if turn 6, if she isn't down to a 0-cost, which can be a bit hard with this deck, you're obviously probably going to want to play Odin instead to get some of those synergies going on, but you can get her down to a pretty low cost, and that can give you a nice backup turn 6 if you don't draw Odin, something like that. Obviously, Shang-Chi helps you build to Death as well. And Ghost is in here just to make sure that, like, on turn 6, if you are in the lead and you have to play your cards first, Ghost just counteracts that, so that you make sure your opponent's cards come out first, so that you can hit them with Gambit, because Gambit will not strike a face-down card that hasn't been played yet. And then Killmonger is in here, one, to power up Death, but also to weed out the weak cards on your opponent's side of the board so that Gambit is hitting stronger things, ideally. So yeah, it's a pretty straightforward deck in that way. And yeah, once again, just recently received a nerf, but I think it still works fairly well. And I think that might be all of the ones I wanted to share. I do have some other decks. Some of them, though, are just variations of those decks I shared previously, but I think ultimately those are the strongest ones for me. The Overflow deck with Ronin, Darkhawk, and Mordo, that's definitely the one I'd recommend. Or the Scry of Sauron is really fun. Really fun, unique, kind of different builds. It's not a death, it's not a move deck, it's not a high evolutionary. It's just kind of different strategies, and they're pretty fun to use. I still don't have high evolutionary, which is why I can't share a deck I've been using with him. But a very powerful card. He's in one of these upcoming Spotlight caches, so maybe I'll draw him there. And yeah, looking forward to doing another update of this in a few months when I get a bunch more cards, which I think the Spotlight caches will help me get there, unlock a bunch of additional stuff. I'm excited for a couple of the cards coming out this month, but overall, it is a bit of a lower month, which is why I think I was excited to do this here, because I probably won't be creating too many crazy new decks in the coming weeks. So thank you, everyone, for listening. I will be definitely back again at some point to talk more Marvel Snap in the future. So thank you for listening. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.